Hi everyone, welcome to the Inter-Party Online Youth Forum powered by the Young Democrats from Singapore Democratic Party. My name is Shawal. I'm the host from Slack and Discuss Problem, and today I'm hosting / moderating this session as well. Okay, I'm joined by Min from Singapore Democratic Party. Okay, you probably already know her, but today I'm also joined by the other members from the different opposition party in Singapore. So first we have Terence from PSP. Okay, and next we have Charles from RP. And then we have Elijah from RDU. And of course, usually I will start off with some icebreaker kind of thing, right? So today, a bit more formal, no games. Okay, so, but I'm going to get you all to introduce yourself. So I'm going to start with Min. Okay, but after you introduce yourself, you need to give people a fact that you think that they probably don't know about you. Okay. Yeah, we already know you like to fight and stuff. Yeah.
That's why I'm in opposition politics. So I'm Min. I'm a marketing and communications consultant. As Shawal said, I fight. I'm a Krav Maga practitioner. The one fact you may not know about me is that my favorite animal is the honey badger.
Have you met a honey badger?
Nope, but I might be one myself.
Okay. Yeah. How about you, Terence?
Oh, hello everybody. My name is Terence. I'm from the Progress Singapore Party, and I contested in GE 2020 under PSP umbrella in Tanjong Pagar GRC itself. I'm currently an airline pilot with Singapore Airlines, and prior to joining SIA, I was running my own business dealing with private aircraft. One interesting fact is my favorite pet is not actually like a dog or a cat or a bird, you know, the normal kind of animals, but I actually like rodents. So the kind of pet I really like is actually a gerbil, right? It's like a, what they call it, a desert rat. So he has a really long tail. Yeah. Okay, and now I'll pass the mic to Charles.
Hello everyone. My name is Shawal Yeo. I'm 31 years old, and of course many people will call me Cheong He Ti Tong. So, by way of profession, I am an advocate and solicitor, and I'm an equity partner at the law firm of Whitefield Law Corporation. The interesting fact about me is that I often, like to eat eggs, and 3 different types of eggs at the nasi padang store. So of course, I sometimes I try not to eat so much because it has cholesterol, but a lot of cholesterol. But I will have salted egg together with the omelette and also the hard-boiled egg with sambal. Yeah.
Okay, just before you move on, you want to shout out the nasi padang store. Sounds really good.
A great nasi padang store run by a makcik is at this beside the Bukit Batok McDonald's outside the MRT station, just beside there's one Indian Muslim eating store. Mm-hmm. There it would be another smaller store which is run by a makcik, and she really does quite good nasi padang, really. And I mean, apart from her sambal prawn and sambal sotong is very nice, and her paru is also very nice. Okay. To be honest, we have to give her a high degree of votes. I mean, but it's not today. We are not nasi padang aficionado session.
Moving on to Elijah.
Hi, I'm Elijah. I use they them pronouns. I'm 19 this year. I graduated from JC just last year. I guess one interesting thing about me is that a lot of involvements that I have with civil society, politics or advocacy often coincide with my big exams. So for instance, in Sec 4, the day before my end of year exam started, I attended the Ready for Repeal Town Hall. And last year, throughout my preparations for A-levels, I was very involved in the general elections, volunteering and everything. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds like we have a very interesting team of people down here. Okay, so today the theme that we are going to talk about is actually our pledge for the future. So we're going to discuss the pledge of Singapore, parts of it, and we will see where we get from there. Okay, so first thing is that we, the citizens of Singapore. So I feel that nowadays, who is a citizen, how is a citizen, and what is really a citizen of Singapore have been debated to no end. So I guess we can talk a little bit about that as well. So for me, most of the time when I hear it's like, hey, you serve NS, yeah, it means you're son of Singapore. Okay, but do you all have any other definition? So maybe Min, would you like to give us your definition?
I mean,
as a citizen?
I think it's there are people who have a long-term stake in the country's well-being and its future. People who are very rooted in and very invested in what happens in this country, in the nation. So, I mean, I think that's quite a loose definition of citizen, but to me, it's a meaningful one because it talks about the people who are really ready to contribute meaningfully. Yeah.
Okay. Elijah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess like when I think about the people who matter in Singapore, right, it's not just about who has legal citizenship, but like really everyone who cares about this nation or contribute in whatever means that they have. So for instance, I feel that we should really learn to love and embrace our migrant workers more because they really play a very crucial role in building our nation, and oftentimes they are overlooked or underpaid, underappreciated. And it's all these people who contribute to our nation that really deserves more value and appreciation. Yeah.
So it seems that you feel that even migrant workers can be considered like our own brothers and sisters if you have put enough effort to help build the country. Is that what you are saying?
Yeah, definitely. Like these people, they play such like a crucial role, and like they are often overlooked. Sorry, I'm repeating what I already said. Yeah, and I think oftentimes also they sacrifice their personal lives back at home from whatever country they came from to really give to the families that they work for over here. Like say like domestic workers or like people who are working at construction sites. They spend like years here trying to pay off debt, trying to build our nation, and I think they should be appreciated more and seen as when we say we, the people of Singapore, we should include them as well. Yeah.
Okay. Charles, do you agree or disagree?
I agree at least partially with what Elijah has said, and this is a topic I've written extensively on. I began from the standpoint, for years before I even entered politics, I wrote on this topic to say that citizenship is not a matter of merely a grant by the government, which is a point made by the two of them, but is a matter, because it can be, in many other countries, to get citizenship is difficult. You need to consult a barrister or a immigration solicitor, which is why if you go on Google, you see a lot of advertisements for immigration barristers, solicitors. But in Singapore, you do not need one because the government will open it to any Tom, Dick and Harry to come in. So therefore, I argued that citizenship cannot be the matter of merely applying or submitting some forms, which you don't even need an immigration barrister or solicitor who in Singapore practices immigration law like myself. I mean, or that if you will need one if you want to go into to enter Australia or the States. This is a hard fact. But in Singapore, you just go and apply, you will get it. So my argument is that immigration citizenship status is a matter of who is able and willing to assimilate into the society, where assimilate refers to wanting to be a stakeholder. So for avoidance of doubt, I am not a xenophobe. So I agree that, for example, people, let's use a concrete example here. People who have served NS should be regarded as citizens immediately, as a matter of right. Secondly, people who are migrant workers, the point Elijah has raised, they should be given an opportunity to apply for citizenship. Of course, I mean, contrary to, people may be surprised when I say that, but sometimes the nuances in what I say have been lost in communication, because on the point of foreigners, there have been many who said that I'm a xenophobe, but but what I'm arguing for is that there must be a distinction between citizens and non-citizens based on the Westphalian theory of, nation state lah. Because the whole claim, you see, before I conclude and get too long-winded, I'm not a Confucianist. I'm a Moist that believes in the universal brotherhood of man. But we note that in the modern society that exists is based on nation-state theory. So the state's claim to dominance over all of us is based on the theory that it must prioritize its own citizens. So there must definitely be a distinction between citizen and non-citizen. Now I'll let Terence answer.
Terence, anything to add on to the very detailed recount from Charles?
Right. Now, I agree with quite many things that Charles mentioned. The part about being a stakeholder, but I mean, to me personally, to call yourself Singaporean, I would use one common denominator, is that if you like the song by Kit Chan called Home, if you know how to sing it and you like it, I think you're as good a Singaporean as as anybody else. Really, that is our favorite and what I call truly Singapore. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so in our pledge, we also talk about being a one united people. So do you think that as time passes, did Singaporeans became more united, or Singaporeans became less united, or no, it's pretty much the same, even though we have much more population now, still the same?
Well, I think that people always talk about the kampong spirit, which I have to say, I'm only 31 this year. I have never lived in the kampong times which both my parents did. So it's hard to say, but what you hear about, what you see in videos of old, right, where people watch the soccer, the Malaysia Cup and whatnot, then you kind of see that spirit. And when you look at it right now, especially where it's a more online society, there definitely is a lot more division compared to the past. However, one thing that definitely unites Singaporeans is whenever anybody attacks Singapore, this person, Singaporeans tend to band together and just bash this other person, because the only people who can attack Singaporeans are Singaporeans themselves.
I was gonna say.
Actually, just to, I agree with Terence, and like there are three major lines of division. I think the first line of division is race. The second line of division is income. The third line of division is conservative versus more liberals. So that is what I want to say on this topic. I mean, I can elaborate, but I don't want to hog too much of airtime. So.
Yeah, I agree with what they said. I think that because of the internet age, right, a lot of opinions become more visible, and people are there's a more accessible platform for people to be more vocal, and which can seem that society is more divisive right now. And I think that it's not that society hasn't been divisive before. I mean, I can't speak from personal experience because I haven't been around too long to make that comparison, but from what I understand, it's that these deep-seated issues like racism, homophobia, these are things that have been experienced in the past as well. But because now people have more resources and accessibility to be able to voice their opinions, that's why it seems that when people are speaking up right now, that we are creating problems that have already existed in the first place. People are just being more vocal about it.
Yeah, so actually I agree a lot with Elijah. It is just that more information can be readily accessed nowadays. So it might feel that it's more divisive, but actually this is a good direction. More people speaking up, more people speaking against the people that are speaking up. That's how democracy works, right? Yeah. So what do you think, Min?
Yeah. So I mean, on your point, I think it's really important that we have these conversations in open. There's no point kind of being too politically correct about things, right? And shoving a lot of issues, under the carpet. I think it's really essential that even if it's a contentious matter, we bring it out in the open. We have a good, debate about that issue, and then I think only then can we solve, any problems that might, be inherent. And also I think, talking about this identity of whether Singapore is more divisive or now than before. I think an interesting question maybe to ask also is, what is our Singaporean identity, right? So, and I think a lot of Singaporeans, especially the younger generation, our generation, we may not be so connected to our country's, nation's history. The real stories, like for example, the stories that my dad used to tell me, and I was, I think, lucky enough to have had access to those stories. Right, my dad would talk about the civil service of yesteryear, and I think that's one reason I was really inspired to go into politics, because there was so much heart, in service, in the way, and the intention of these people, to serve their country, and there was a lot of. I think there are all these stories that unfortunately have not made it into mainstream conversation or our history textbooks. But it's really important, I think, that especially the older generation continue to talk about these stories, like personal stories, stories of their own service in any way. It doesn't have to be through civil service or through government or establishment. But all these stories, I think, are very necessary. it makes you feel really connected to the country in a way that you may not, be so inclined to feel if you only had exposure to certain material or certain narratives. Yeah.
Okay, so so what do you think went wrong between that time where your dad was still telling stories to now? How come suddenly the stories ended? What happened?
I think I think one reason is, I think quite likely the rapid economic expansion. The
Focus is different.
exactly, yeah. So there is, there's a need when you're focusing on economic outcomes, right? To not, be so focused on the narratives, certain truths and certain, stories. It's not wrong necessarily, but when we were, developing as a country, there was so much of a emphasis on let's, become this economic superpower. Let's just, consolidate all our resources in this area. And I think, that naturally shifts the focus from, from heart, from that sort of, from your nation's soul. And I think, unfortunately, we may have done it a little bit too quickly, or we may have done it in a way that wasn't balanced enough. Whether or not it was necessary, I'm not sure. It was, where Singapore was, say, decades ago to where we managed to come, now. It's tremendous, right, the progress. But unfortunately, it has come at the expense of certain, sectors and certain parts of our nation's soul.
This is what I want to touch upon briefly, which is the unkind society thesis, which to me, I agree 101% what Min has said, and I want to build on further to say that another aspect of this unkind society thesis is that the flip side of meritocracy, where we emphasize on economic progress, so we have ideologies that emphasize on who is successful. So then people who are not successful become defined as non-stakeholders, because I think the four of us agreed that we talk about the concept of stakeholders, but historically in the society of Singapore, they only emphasize a certain group of people. The stakeholder, or the epitome of the stakeholder, is a Chinese man, well-educated, straight, and professional. So would be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, pilot, accountant, something like that.
Pilot,
The memes. But one big problem, you see, for the focal point of the discussion is that the stereotype has to be moved away from, because in the wider geopolitical context, we saw that there is a range of monopoly of our resources. Now, no longer is it the society of the past. Like in 1970s, 1980s, usually these people are the people who are allowed to speak. So even a funny video, was shared about Vivian Balakrishnan was once a critic of the BAP, and he attended on TV. Really. You can go and Google. It's still available on YouTube. And we saw that a gathering of all these young stakeholders was invited, where invariably all of them were people who fit that bill. There were people who were of these categories, you see. But the issue is that nowadays we are realizing that society is moving towards a point of view that there are more stakeholders in the society. We cannot only pay lip service to them. So for example, as I wanted to say, you see, this is a good thing because we are now engaged in democratic discourse. And the spectrum of people that will respond, like for example, the comment by Elijah that migrant workers should be allowed to be regarded as citizens. To me, I feel that this is up for debate and discussion, and I do not totally disagree with Elijah, but of course there will be people who may disagree. And that is where the discussion is in itself good, because according to, it will produce it is like, according to the Hegelian dialectic, right, it will produce it will produce a kind of debate. It will produce a debate, and we will prevent people from thinking that there is only one correct narrative. Going back to Min's point. So we hope that, really today we can have a fruitful discussion.
Correct. So I'm going to throw a slightly more tough question at you. So, because you are candidates, right? So you're going to be politicians someday, hopefully, I hope. So if you eventually become politicians, what would you do to help with this problem? Or like what policies would you push forward?
For me, I mean, I personally, I do not regard myself as a politician, nor do I aspire to be one, despite many people telling me I am, but I regard myself as a political activist. A political activist is defined as someone like Jollivan, who engages in civil disobedience to defy the laws of his time. And I have done so recently in many ways, like for example, criticizing a police officer known as Jonathan Ao Yong, who filed a report against the TOC of his own accord, and therefore after that being investigated by the police. I mean, I'm being investigated by the police currently, and also based on these comments lah. But whatever it is, I do not agree. My response to you before I leave the Terence is, I do not see myself as a politician, but more as a political activist and one who believes in defying laws that I deem as unjust, and to walk this path of Jollivan.
Okay.
Well, I just want to add on to what Charles mentioned just now about who controls society, and along that line. So as we know, our Prime Minister himself. No. But our Prime Minister himself said something about having a natural aristocracy. When you have the top leader in the country saying that we need to have a natural, I don't even know what's the meaning of a natural aristocracy. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But then, won't you perpetuate social class divide? That's the one thing that is really kind of killing the society, in my opinion, right now. And I think, you asked Charles just now about what kind of policies would you want to push. If you're talking about social class divide, you're talking about, different classes in society. You have your so-called ruling class and working class and whatnot. But when we delve into the education system, for example, what are we seeing right now? We're seeing something called a SAP school system, Special Assistance Plan, is it? I don't know what the P stands for. Yeah, but it's the SAP school system. I was from a SAP school, so I was one of the so-called beneficiaries of that. But I think moving forward, we have to understand that the SAP school system only benefits the Chinese, right? And we are fortunate. Charles said, what's the definition of the what were you saying? The ruling class, is it?
Yeah, the people that are defined as stakeholders.
Right. Yeah. See, male, Chinese.
Pilot.
And pilot. Right. Okay. Let's not use occupation here, but the fact that I was born a male and Chinese, and put into a SAP school system, right, where I took higher Chinese, and of course that perpetuated into secondary school and down. But when you look at it, what are the Malays getting, the Indians getting, and others, however others is defined, they are not getting the same opportunity. The education system, in a way, is propagating some sort of a class divide already. So is it time for review of this SAP school system? I believe it is. So and of course there's so many other systems, right? MOE says that every school is a good school. Really, I don't know. Maybe the minister can take the lead and send his child to a neighborhood school, and then I will really believe, because
that's when right, it's really
if you say, I send my daughter to RGS because we live in Orchard, but of course now RGS is in Bishan, but if you say, I live in Bukit Timah, so I send my kids to Hwa Chong because of distance. No, man, you send your kid to Hwa Chong because it's a elite school, right? And because you were one of the elites, that's why you send your kid there. So yeah, there's a lot of systems that has to change, a lot of policies that have to change to really start this ball rolling about how to negate class divide in the country. Because the overarching theme here is unity, right? You want to talk about one united people. How can you be united when you are already divided from your very baseline? So yeah,
this is an extremely powerful point made by Terence, which I did share about before, that the definition of the SAP school is inherently racist. Because if you look at the statistics, the vast majority of senior leadership of the PAP and of course in government in Singapore are from Raffles and Hwa Chong. So if we define them as the two temples of false meritocracy, which I argued before, so you see, one of these schools is already foreclosed off to foreigner, to non-Chinese. So, can we therefore say that it is racist? Because think about it logically. If these two schools make up statistics, hard statistics these are matters that can be Googled. The truth is that the vast majority of PSC scholars, senior government officials, come from these two schools. And regarding Hwa Chong, which is a SEP school, the vast majority of its students are Chinese. These are not rocket science I'm talking, really. So, ipso facto, it creates a system of racism because one of these two places where you must go in to adhere to the state ideology and to progress on is foreclosed off to non-Chinese. But of course, as regarding Raffles, there are many people who are not. Of course, the criticism could be there are other things we can discuss about, but for today's point of discussion, we must admit that the SEP school system is inherently racist. This is an important point that I think will be debated in the future.
But Elijah, I think you would know best, right? Because you just finished A-levels. Do you also feel the SEP school / non-SEP school segregation? Is there a difference?
Definitely. For me, I also graduated from a SEP school, and it was also an IP program, so integrated program, 6 years in the same school. And I feel that because like a lot of social justice issues are very intersectional, so like race, class, and everything. So inherently, because the larger demographic of the student population were Chinese people, so there were people of like higher class, higher privilege as well. And because of that, there's a lot of ignorance within the student body and also at the staff level as well. And I feel that apart from the opportunities that are reserved for Chinese people, because of the level of ignorance and the general sense of close-mindedness, there's also an impact on student welfare in itself because of perpetuation of a lot of these more privileged mindsets, as in there's a lack of understanding towards racism, towards homophobia, towards xenophobia, towards ableism, ageism.
Do you have one or two examples?
One or two examples.
Because I'm not from SEP school, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, definitely. So with the recent things about trans policies that have like transpired right in civil society, I've personally experienced transphobia in school. I've been called out in a lecture with 3/4 of my cohort, and the teacher made a rather insensitive comment. She said like, oh, as long as you're wearing a skirt, I think that you're a girl. If you want to be a guy, wait for your next life. And I was like, huh? But at that time, like, cause like she was a rather respected staff member in school, I respected her myself as well. So I felt like there wasn't any staff member that I could speak to about this incident. And when I eventually did, the school leader told me that, oh, I'm just like, I shouldn't feel too hurt, that wasn't discrimination. So like there is a severe lack of policies in place to protect disenfranchised students in school. So, and I feel like the SEP system, such that there is a congregation of privileged students, perpetuates that because there is a lack of space to cultivate that social awareness as well. And which like perpetuates the problems that the lack of inclusive policies cause. Yeah.
So after your teacher said that nobody except you felt offended, there should be some others, right? That like, hey, that's not right.
Yeah. I talked to some of my friends afterwards, and like they did find it very like, why did she make that statement? It's a bit like offensive. It's a bit insensitive. But the larger like student population didn't feel that way, or at least they didn't vocally express that lah. I only remember like after she made a comment, like the whole like lecture theatre just fell silent. So I was like, okay, yeah. I guess like people did feel that it was a little off, but like we didn't know how to put it into words at that point in time as well. Yeah.
I mean, do you have any experience that's like that in your school days, whereby some educator say something and then you're like, whoa, that's wrong, but everybody's like, it's alright?
Not really, but I mean, I do kind of take from your experience as well in terms of the fact that, so I was from MGS, and while I got an amazing education there, I do admit to at that time being quite sheltered. So when I went to Ngee Poly and I took Mass Comm, that whole environment was entirely different. But I'm so glad that I went, to Poly instead of JC, because I think I really got exposed to the world, at that age. I remember having a classmate who, said that he couldn't afford, to eat anything but 2 packets of instant noodles a day. Some of our classmates ended up, pooling together some cash for him, so that he could buy food. But that was unheard of, in MGS, right? Everyone there is upper middle class, at least, and taking from Terence and Charles as well, mostly Chinese, right? So I can see how there's definitely, a disconnect between, the aspiration, or at least some kind of aspiration to be more equal and equitable, and also the fact that there are so many lines of division, across race, across, income and class categories. But also I think one thing that Elijah pointed out, which I thought was quite interesting, was 2 things. So the fact that your teacher made a very insensitive comment may actually not have been to her insensitive, right? And I also think it's because there's not enough discussion in society about, issues that matter, sensitivity, compassion and all that. So there's a lot of, there are a lot of conversations that take place, whether it's, in person or, on the internet, that end up sounding quite insensitive, and it's just because people aren't exposed to different views. And that's why I'm such a big advocate of, let's have, open discourse in society. And the other thing that you mentioned also, which stood out to me, was the fact that when your teacher made that comment, there might have been some people who shared your views, and thought it might have been a bit insensitive or offensive, but no one spoke up. And that is so, that's so typical, right, of Singaporean society, right? We don't really necessarily speak up enough, and it doesn't have to be confrontational. I keep saying this. Even if you have a point to make that isn't aligned to the views of, say, someone in an authority figure or someone in establishment, you don't have to do it you don't have to put it across in a way that's confrontational. There is a time and space for say protest. There's a time and space for certain types of civil disobedience, sure, but it doesn't always have to be, right? So there's a lot of an assumption within society that if you're going to say something that challenges authority, it's that in itself is confrontational, but it's all part of having discourse in society, which I think is severely lacking in Singapore. And even if we see people talking about things in the comment section, everyone's a hero there, right? But it doesn't translate. It doesn't really translate into people actually coming together or having solid discussions in a physical space more often than not.
Yes, I completely agree with whatever Min just said. So I'll just go with her final point now. I'll jump back to the initial point. So the civil discourse, or whatever you want to call this, where younger people are willing to stand up, right? So for example, this elections itself, you can see so many younger candidates who actually ran, right? So and of course we can also see this huge swing in the voting demographic, whereby the younger voters are a bit more informed, they're a bit more involved in the whole electoral process as well. Yeah, so that's something that I think can definitely be improved upon. And dialogues, conversations, and forums like this are important, not only within politics, but within civil society on its own, be it whether you're looking at VWOs or whatnot. And I just want to jump back to Min's initial point. She mentioned that she was from MGS. So I just want to give everybody who's listening a kind of scenario, a very plausible scenario. Imagine you are from a upper middle class family. You live in private housing. Why you say private housing is because HDB, they have this racial quota. So in every block you'll definitely be able to see all the different races. However, private housing do not have this quota. So imagine you live in a very atas neighborhood, right? In a private housing. You grow up, you go to a SEP school. After that, you go to, say, Hwa Chong.
Oh.
Then you go to Hwa Chong for 6 years, Chinese High Hwa Chong and whatnot. Then after that, you go to a top university and do a great course. there's a very high chance here you might not have a single friend from another race. You might not have a single friend from another social class. And this is something which IPS survey also came up with, is that they realized that people are not mixing across social classes. So yeah, here we can all say the same Singapore pledge, we can all know the lyrics to Home, but do you actually know people from the lower social classes? Right, so if you don't, then how can you claim to be a united people? Because you are united with your class, you're not united with everyone.
Everybody else,
Yeah, so that's something very important.
See, this is really another very powerful point Terence has raised, which the IPS survey is merely one in a long list of surveys that have pointed out very clearly this issue of ossification of society. So what we are saying is that okay, this is a very serious issue because you see, although my personal belief is that although in the past the level of state repression and brutality was a lot much worse, but the level of unity among Singaporeans in terms of the likelihood that a person at the upper class would still know people or have friends of other races and other lower classes, socio-economically speaking, is still much more than today, because they did not have, back then there was a high level of societal upheaval, and also people generally believed that there is a need to interact with they were not able to for want of a better word I mean the events of the time like World War II and the events like the building up of Singapore society, most people started from scratch or were careful not to interact, not to they were not able to live off in a cloistered bubble, as their own parents may not have been particularly wealthy, or even if their parents were wealthy, the number of people in Singapore there is also not much more you know what I mean? So they were not, although we are not saying that their cloistered circle did not exist. Definitely it did exist, but it was much harder to exist independently of other people. And the survey, the IPS survey, is just one out of many other surveys that have pointed out very clearly that back then it was unreported. It was totally unknown that there will be people who have no friends of other races or no friends, because you will have to go through army, a social leveler, and also you would generally need to mix with people that are lower. Of course, the issue back then was that the level of state repression and fear is a lot higher, but there was not this issue of societal breaking, like ossification of society. So
Yeah, so I kind of understand that what you're saying is that because back then people had to interact with other people with different socio-economic classes to through their daily life. There's no way to avoid them. Yeah, but nowadays there can be a path, or actually that path is quite common nowadays, that they can go through a path that they never meet anybody else, and therefore they are just in their bubble forever and after. Yeah. So what do you think, Elijah? Because you're still young, you're 19 or something, right? Yeah. So in your life up to now, what do you think? Do you think it's like what they say, there is really a chance that somebody never had a friend of another race or another socio-economic class?
Yeah, I quite agree with what he shared, because there are a lot of things are very systemic when it comes to discrimination and things like that. So when these set roots are in place, then it minimizes our chances of interaction across different races, different classes, and things like that. And I agree a lot with what Terence mentioned earlier about how oftentimes right now we are not united as everyone, but only within our bubble. And I think that's when we have to question what are the policies in place that prevent us from really authentically integrating with one another as we did in the past. And I also appreciate things in society where we have things like mutual aid that started about last year in Singapore, that really bridges the gaps between people of lower income or lower class to people who have the privilege to redistribute that to support people from different classes and income levels. Alright, so when it comes to the point where we need people to activate their own efforts in order to support one another, to support the disenfranchised, when we live in a country where we have a government, we have leaders meant to protect these people, then we really have to question what are the limitations to our system and how we can better improve it so that we really encapsulate everybody, and we really stand united as one people, regardless of our backgrounds and different classes, different genders and everything. Yeah.
Charles got something to add on. It looks like he deep thought.
No, the concrete example I will give is that one example of what I'm trying to say is that, for example, if you look at our parents' generation, the average Chinese, of course, racism still exists then, and they may discriminate against others, but the vast majority of boomers are able to speak Bahasa Melayu. They are able to understand, like, for example, I mean, if you think about it, they will order rendang, they were able to appreciate lontong, they are able to appreciate Malay food, they will know what is the name, like, they will know what is telur asin, they know what is all that, but younger people will not. For example, the number of young Chinese that know how to eat putu mayam, or they know how to appreciate Indian food, is very low. And their level of Indian friends or Malay friends may be very low. So what if the next generation, it will further manifest in terms of outspread racism? Because in terms of respect for other races, this is definitely much higher in the time of our parents, and also knowledge that we must coexist peacefully, and we must also, really respect and not to make any remarks that are contrary to the other person's religious or racial feelings lah. However, in recent years, I think because the society is, of course, at a whole, our society is still united, and we one issue is also that of course some people do not agree that this is correct lah, but the society has become more united against foreigners lah. This is one point that we would touch on, I think, later in the discussion. Do the foreigners constitute stakeholders? Because Singaporean Chinese will also distance themselves from PRC, and people who are like, local Indians, like, even Ravi, my mentor, they have written out, and they do not wish to be linked with people from the Sikha nationals, and they feel that, these people are not properly put stakeholder in the society if they want to behave in an oppressive manner, like Ramesh and Ramali and all these lah. So again, the main point is that we need to return to this best practice of the boomers by ensuring that, we live peacefully with other cultures, and also appreciating the practices of the other cultures lah. We must understand that it begins from, these are small things would show that, we are able to appreciate their sensitivities, and not become a society where there's open racial tension. If not, it will be very bad.
So just now Elijah was saying that if there's a less artificial way of letting everybody interact, because like you said something about the HDB quota, that's one way that they get all the races together. Army is another way to get all the races together. Do you have any idea like what could be done to like more naturally integrate everybody from different races, socio-economic classes? Any plans?
I'm going to be very honest here and say that, because unlike the PAP, they like to say that they have all the answers. For this question, I don't have an answer.
No plans, huh?
I really do not. I know that this is a problem, and I know that we have to really work on this, but I know that there is a higher degree of racial stratification in terms of, because if you speak to most people who are our parents' generation, my parents' generation, you will find that the majority of them are able to they have friends from other races, and are able to, they will, it's no such thing as they have no friends from other races, and also no such thing as they will in fact keep in close contact with their friends or other races who are their former neighbor or primary school friend and all these. No such thing as, and there's also no such thing as open racism. At most, they may have racist thoughts or discriminatory thought, but it's very different from, they would ultimately gather together, to based on their own personal political position, and they will also be very unhappy with the state lah. I mean, you will see that this is one way that they do not. But increasingly, the state has started to become. One problem is the Sinicization of Singapore that wants to substitute the Malayan Chinese identity, which is with a Chinese mentality, which is going to increase the level of racism in Singapore. Because what is the difference between Malayan Chinese, which is that we know that, for example, we exist in the Nusantara region, we have to exist peacefully with Indians and Malays. But however, the Chinese, they believe in Chinese supremacy. They believe that China is the overlord of Southeast Asia and is here to control and dominate Singapore. So this is a big problem because the Sinicization policy, these Chinese are very different from Chinese that have the Peranakan Chinese that are on good terms with Malay and Indians.
Okay, I'll just add on to Charles. Your question about how we can possibly reverse it. As I mentioned just now about the SEP school system, which I really believe is high time for review. You can't have this kind of schools where you have we have 80% Chinese or something in Singapore, yet 95, 99% of SEP school students are Chinese. It's way above the national average. So things like that got to change. I think even in terms of top political leadership, I think that if we move away from only that we can only have a Chinese PM, but how about if we have a non-Chinese PM, right?
But we are ready for a Malay president though.
Well, that has to be legislated, right? Which is so sad, right? They have to alter the whole constitution just for it.
Indian Muslim president.
Yeah, but you see, change starts from the top, right? The rod also always starts from the top. So whatever thing is wrong down here, the top must change for the bottom to see proper policies. Yeah. Should I pass the mic to Elijah?
Yeah, sure. Elijah, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, I guess to respond to your question, what policies we could put in place.
What can we do?
Yeah, I don't think there is one policy that we can put in place, but rather reviewing every law and policy that we have that has a tendency to discriminate or give a certain group of people a level of privilege. So say currently in our law we have section 377A, right? So that inherently disenfranchises the LGBTQ plus community. So if we remove things like that and implement say anti-discrimination laws, then I think societal integration will very naturally fall in place. Although it will take some time for these laws to set in, for mindsets to change and everything. Yeah.
But some of the members of parliament, they say they have to wait for when Singaporeans are ready to remove 377A. How do we know when it's ready?
This will bring us to
Lawyer
the next topic of because earlier on we touched on discrimination based on class, then race, then now we are based on the third one already. Yeah, you see, amongst all the 159 candidates that stood in the election, I was the only candidate that said openly that I'm in favour of repeal of 377A. Honestly, and even then my party that is not my party's official stance. My party's official stance is that it should be in the context of wider discrimination. But of course the reason why I said this is because my mentor is one of the lawyers who for many years sought to strike down 377A. And of course, I myself have written a lot and set out the arguments why, and of course many other legal luminaries have also pointed this out, like the former Chief Justice and Walter Woon, the former AG. They did. Of course, I shall not bore many of the audience here who are not interested to delve into legal arguments, because these are very lengthy. But the main points we want to put across are that 377A is a vestige of colonial oppression, and also which when are we ready? To return to the question, when are we ready? It will be to consider the wider views of majority of Singaporeans who may not have much. For me, I like to begin from this point of view that the reason why we must abolish 377A is because we cannot believe the radical Christians believe that people will become, that there will be increase in homosexuality in society. I like to draw a simple analogy. I am straight as a ruler. People know that I have had, many girlfriends and all that. So I always ask my straight friends this thing. Okay, guys, it's quite humorous, right? Let's say I show you now a photo of people who are of different sexual orientations doing whatever they are doing, sexual activities. Will you become
converted to them? You will not. And that's why you can see that this is a rubbish propaganda of the state. That because they will not. And you can show this to me 100 times. The truth of the matter is that historically, about 5 to 10% of the society has not been straight. And they cannot be compelled by force of law, force of violence or whatever to become straight. And similarly, those who are straight, we also cannot be compelled to become like them. And we have to respect them and let them live their own life and we cannot harangue them. Because if we are going to harangue them, then we are really, behaving in a very inhumane and improper manner. And the next thing to say is that, really, if you look at Chinese culture, Indian culture, and also you look at culture of Southeast Asia, Asian culture, the truth is that people who do not identify as 100% straight as a ruler or cis individuals, they did exist from time immemorial. And it is wrong to say that homosexuality, LGBTQ, is a Western thing. This is totally wrong, and I have nothing to say further about this.
Yeah, I just want to add something on as well, like what Terence said earlier, like power comes from the top, right? And I think when we come to the question of are Singaporeans ready, I think we have to question why are they not ready? What are the things in place that cause them to retain certain mindsets and all that? We look at schools, sexuality education, it's not inclusive at the moment. I would say it's pretty backward. I have no idea what they teach in sexuality education. And we look at TV representation. It's if I'm not wrong, Channel 8 is the most watched channel, and it's you only see Chinese people, and that's the representative of what Singapore is, but that's not the reality because we have other races as well. And because of these things that we grow up with, the school environment, the curriculum, what we see on TV, what's in media representation, that's why people are not ready, because we don't see the diversity that exists in society, because we are not provided with nuanced perspective and things like that. So are Singaporeans ready? Maybe not, but we have to ask why as well. And ultimately it still goes back to the top, what are the policies we have in place? What are we teaching our children in school? Yeah.
Even Lee Kuan Yew, he was in favor of he did state before on TV this is again a matter of historical record. He did state on TV that he believes that it is a matter of sexual orientation, a matter of born by it's not a matter of choice, but it is a matter of birth. And he did also say that it's unlikely that they can be persuaded or changed. It also really is saying whatever I just said. So I think that the government is being very cowardly to
skirt around the problem.
Repealing LGBT, because even if they always use this, and a lot of people will use this issue about they fear that if they do this and they lose votes. But who would they possibly lose the votes to? Because all the other opposition parties
Same line, right? Same line.
are also
saying the same thing.
Yeah, there's no opposition party that is very anti-LGBT.
Correct.
Correct. Of one, there is no such party. And do you think that the people establish a party for this is actually, at the end of the day, this is, although it's true that this is not an issue of note to most Singaporeans based on the Singaporean thinking but the big problem is that this is representative of how Singapore is out of whack with the wider world, which the wider world agrees that we should not bother them. Those who are straight should not bother them or oppress them, leave them to do whatever they want, and that is it. Full stop. What's there? No need to go into legal education and explain all this argument and all that.
Okay, cool. So I guess we have discussed about prosperity, progress, and the one thing that we have not thought about is happiness. Okay, so I think we can end on that note. The last thing that we'll talk about today is happiness. Do you think Singaporeans are happier now, less happy than 50 years ago? Is there anything that you want to say to Singaporeans, maybe you should do this, then you all will be more happy? Yeah, because part of our pledge is happiness. Yeah, but very little people talk about how Singaporeans can be more happy.
Yeah, of course. We always talk about economic growth.
Prosperity.
How about, right? Part of the pledge is prosperity, but right before the word prosperity, right, it's actually happiness. Happiness, then prosperity and progress for our nation. So, why are we not using happiness of our citizens as an index, right? So think of it: work-life balance, job satisfaction. Things like that, right? And maybe your relationship with your family. These are things that are not looked into. So if you want to look at happiness, I would say if cost of living is high, for example, now you need dual income families. Both parents are not able to spend as much time with their child. Is the child as happy? I would think probably not. So it becomes a very, very complex issue that happiness can be directly affected by economic growth. Not saying that we shouldn't have economic growth, because without a very, very strong economy, which Singapore has, we won't be able to fund a lot of the programs that, social programs and whatnot. But should we not try to shift the focus a little bit on, there's this show on radio called Focus on the Family. I really think we should have a bigger focus on the family, have a bigger focus on people's mental health as well.
Yeah.
It's an issue that I think it's not looked into enough. The light is not shown on mental health enough, where we have more more people who have schizophrenia, more people who are suffering from depression, bipolar disorder. How is all these things exacerbated? I believe it has to do with the stress of society, has to do with GDP at all costs kind of a basis. So that's definitely high time for change.
Yeah. So I think we're a really stressed out society. I mentioned this quite a lot in some of my speeches, which is we spent about $32 billion. Sorry, $3.2 billion. Decimal point, very important. In every year annually on stress-related illnesses and ailments. Whether it's gastric disorders, whether it could be heart disorders or whatnot. However stress manifests, Singapore spends that much money on stress-related disorders every year. And that, if you want to talk about the balance between, social well-being or individual well-being and economic well-being, there's a direct correlation and a direct cost to the fact that, if our society is not happy and healthy, there's going to be an economic cost, and it goes beyond just, the country spending this kind of money on treating disorders or treating stress-related illnesses. It is individual, the individual ability to contribute and to live a good life, the individual's ability to be economically viable as well. So, all these things, I think, come into play. And I don't think we're a very happy and healthy society. And I do agree that, one thing is work-life balance, but it's also, and this is something that the Young Democrats in SDP, we've been looking at a lot, in line with our mental health policy, is really redefining or looking to reevaluate what is the definition of a successful life. What is the good life? Is it, the 10,000 degrees you hold under your belt? Is it, is it how much money you're making every month? Are those really meaningful barometers of success, right? And I think this is something that we as a society have to ask ourselves, and I think it's also something that will help us shape our future policies. So, like Charles said, I don't know whether we have a concrete answer as to what kind of policies are going to, level the playing field for Singaporeans. We know, I think we have a rough idea where we want to go, the general direction. But I also think it needs to start with a societal conversation on what is a successful nation and what is a successful society. So for instance, like where we are now, we've developed based on, GDP, right, as an indicator of national well-being, economic well-being, even to some extent social well-being, although that is actually not quite the case with GDP. So is it now time then to maybe introduce, maybe in conjunction with or in parallel to GDP, a different kind of indicator, as to what is a happy, healthy nation? Because for GDP, for example, if you're focused so much on economic gains, right, and like you have an oil spill, right, that the money and the jobs that will be generated from cleaning up that oil spill will contribute to GDP. So that year there might be a spike, or an uplift. But that does not tell the story of what happened, which is there was, negligence possibly. There was environmental destruction. So those jobs are really, or the effort and the economic activity that was generated around that incident was overall more negative than it was positive. But GDP will represent that as something that was good. So I think it's also time to look at a different kind of indicator. Maybe I think there's a happiness index, for example, that I think Bhutan may be using, and I think it's really necessary to bring that into the picture at least, to complement GDP, because I think it's unrealistic to not rely on GDP to abolish it. That's not going to happen, but to maybe look at something else as well that can mitigate the story that's told by GDP. Yeah.
Charles, anything to add on?
I'm in really full agreement with both Min and Terence, because the point I want to say is that a happy society, first of all, like Terence, we are not opposed to economic growth. In fact, I believe economic growth is very important, because if we are not able to uplift society if there is no economic growth as a whole. However, what is important is that the economic growth must trickle down to those who are below. And there must be a uplifting of the whole society as a whole. So the next thing I always tell people is that economic growth is illusory if there is no if there's no democracy, because it will then go to the hands of those who are rich. Now, these are not rocket science. Again, then the next question it will then transit to Min's point, which is about the level of stress in society. I mean, I see this very often in my work as a lawyer, and also I have no doubt that, Singapore is a place where the Dalai Lama's quote rings very true, that, we never really live because we are rushing to get rich, and then after that, when we are rich, we pay. Essentially, the summary is that, we are paying for, when we are young, we use our health to exchange for wealth. Then when we are old, we use our wealth to exchange for health. So actually, we got nothing lah. You know what I mean? So I mean, these are points that those who are really. There are some other important points that we have to note, like for example, introspection about life, understanding the meaning of life. Singaporeans are quite bad at this. Secondly, the next thing is that the level of critical thinking and questioning. This may also be a big problem from the economic point of view, because Singaporeans are good at conforming, but when it comes to thinking out of the barrier, in order to further improve, because by definition, then when you are good, you cannot learn from anyone else. Like mugging TYSY, Singaporeans are quite good lah. But in terms of creativity, music and all these, Singaporeans tend to be lagging behind, and they also. I think that if we are not able to ensure that we have a critical, let me give a concrete example. For example, I deal with the majority of my client base are foreigners, and actually they are quite able to, they are able to spot business opportunities, and they are able to identify legal loopholes, and they see they are willing to see the law as breaking the law as a means to an end, and they are sometimes willing to because in their society they face a lot of deprivation. So in a sense, they are willing to, they are more creative, and they may be more risk takers, which is good. Like a concrete example is like, for example, Vietnamese that being a lawyer opened my eyes a lot, because I came from a fairly privileged background, so I didn't know that there are people who swim with all their belongings, and they will come back into Singapore to go and sell cigarettes in Geylang, and after that they are caned, then they will come back again, and they will risk their life many times to come back to Singapore because they want to sell cigarette to those passing car, contraband cigarette in Geylang lah, the lorong lah. But the point, of course, this is an illegal activity that we do not condone. But my point is that risk-taking or adventurousness is another part of happiness which it had been lost in Singapore over the last 20-30 years, but it's present amongst those of our parents' generation. So these are the positive points, we want to hope that Singaporeans really are able to embrace a wider definition of happiness, like Terence and Minus.
Yeah, I think Min, Terence, and Charles have shared rather substantively already, so I'll just add on very briefly. I think like the problem why Singaporeans are not very happy, or like, yeah, we're not very happy, is because of how like pretty much since we are born, we are measured by our level of productivity rather than anything else. There's no like intrinsic worth. Like if I introduce myself, people wouldn't just see me as like Elijah. They'll be like, oh, JC graduate, aspiring politician. Like there's always all these labels and like titles that you're expected to adopt and like have on. And like it trickles down all the way like from like even as like a student, like in schools, like among your peers, you're like 9 years old and comparing grades with like everyone, and we have a booming billion-dollar tuition industry, and like the stress, like it's like pretty much you are born a stressful child. Like there's no room to like explore, to play, and like to develop like very critical levels of like thinking and like creativity, which can in turn also affect like the economy, like if you want to take that standpoint. And like what they have mentioned earlier, there's also like rising like mental health issues, and if people are not given the substantive emotional capacity to just exist as a person, how are they going to contribute to the economy in the first place? So it's very critical that we pay attention to like happiness levels as well, and like the welfare of the people, like reducing like the intrinsic need to be competitive when like people can just be like their unique selves and like not be measured by how much they can contribute to their economy lah. And I think that would be much more helpful like for the economy in the I can't pronounce, in the long run as well, when people like really like do things that they are passionate in and really recognize their intrinsic worth before being measured by like how much they can contribute like financially. Yeah.
So in conclusion, right, would you all agree that maybe it is time for us to focus on the happiness part of achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation?
Yeah, a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess now is a good point to end. Okay, so but before we go off, okay, we'll start from Elijah. Any last thing to say to our audience before we go, and then we'll proceed down the line.
Alright. I mean, there's a lot that's been going on in the past year, the pandemic and everything, and I think it is especially now, since like all these issues are accentuated and brought into conversation, that we pay attention to them and don't let the conversation die down. Let's continue to be involved politically, civilly, and let's really build a Singapore that is for everyone, and that we can truly recite our pledge in as much truth as possible. Yeah.
Charles?
My message is to all of you guys, on behalf of the Reform Party, is first of all to wish you guys a very happy Chinese New Year festivities. Secondly, I want to urge all of you guys to realize that we are living in a time of unprecedented change, and to use this time to shape our world for the better. Recognize that the major that we are, at the end of the day, we are not defined by who we are, like a lawyer, a student from a top school, accountant, or a person, but we are a human soul that has inherent dignity based on really the really concepts of human rights that have regrettably been trampled on in Singapore as viewing us as a mere unit of economic productivity.
Since Reform Party has wished everybody a very happy New Year, the PSP also obviously like to wish everybody a very happy Chinese New Year, and also happy Valentine's. If you are
See, he topped you already.
if you are single, don't worry.
Terence, is available?
I don't think so.
Not available. But many people are just waiting for you. So, yeah. But never mind. Regarding my closing off sentence is that all of us here, we all joined, be it SDP, PSP, RDU, RP. We all joined politics for a reason, right? We're here to effect change because we see something wrong. So likewise for you, if you know something is wrong and there's definitely something which you see not very right, I'm not asking you that you have to join our parties, because even if you don't participate in politics, there are so many associations out there, you know, voluntary organizations, non-governmental organizations, charities in which you can help out, contribute your time if you have time. If you don't have time, you have money, too much money, you donate money. It doesn't matter, but be part of this movement to make society a better place, because that's what everyone here is for. So I certainly hope you can do it. And of course, if you would like to join our respective parties, we are more than happy to have you. Yeah, thank you. Oh wait, you have a
Yeah,
mic.
okay. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's we had a really good discussion, and you know, I think one thing that I would like to, you know, like share with the viewers is that the opposition parties in Singapore, I mean, we stand for slightly different things, you know, across the political spectrum, but essentially we've all come together, you know, with this spirit of camaraderie and, you know, to discuss issues that are all important to us, each one of us and each one of our parties. You know, and I think one thing that's really important that Singaporeans do, I think, is to firstly, I think, have a good think about who you are as a person, what you stand for, and like Terence said, don't be afraid to stand up for what you think is right, or to stand up against what you think is wrong, you know. So also going from what Charles said, and I think it's really important that when you know yourself well, and when you've interrogated yourself to find out who you are, I think naturally you will find a position that, you know, you want to support, things that you find meaningful, pursuits that you want to, you know, go forth with. And so that's one thing. The other thing also is do things together. You know, I mean, find a tribe, find a community that you can feel comfortable with, that you feel like you belong to, and it's easier then to, you know, like to pursue your passions, you know, to move ahead with the endeavors that you want to pursue and see flourish. So I think, you know, find a community, and before that, think about who you are, and be quite honest and authentic about that process of self-discovery.
Okay. So I believe I represent the lay people here, and I think this conversation was very helpful for me. I learned a lot of things from these guys, and hopefully you guys learn a lot from them as well. So thank you for watching the Inter-Party Online Youth Forum brought to you by the Young Democrats. My name is Shawal, and I wish you good day.